We're looking today at the FSA Photographic Project, one of the truly great achievements in the history of social documentary photography and in American history. General overview, the FSA Photographic Project was a government program that was created to show Americans to America during the Great Depression. What does FSA stand for? Well, it stands for Farm Security Administration. And the project originated as a documentary of agricultural relief programs, but it evolved over time to become much, much more than that. Um, in terms of the big picture, the photographic project began in 1935 under a different name, but quickly transitioned to the FSA administration. Began in 1935 and lasted until 1942. And by then, it was property of the Office of War Information. Over the span of this project, 20 photographers were hired at one time or another, and as a whole, they created over 77,000 photographs. And these photographs were published and exhibited in countless places all over the country, starting as soon as they were made and lasting up to the present day. And the collection of photographs is kept by the Library of Congress, and it is free to the American people for our use because we paid for it. Now, this is a photograph of Roy Stryker. He was the director of the FSA Photographic Project from its beginnings until its end in 1942. And when we look back at the history of photography and look at significant individuals who were not themselves photographers but who had a strong influence on how the medium evolved and was used over time, Roy Stryker is ranks very high among those people. So he was instrumental in the creation of this program, and during the duration of the program, he was constantly fighting to get the government resources that were necessary to be able to make it continue and to keep the photographs appropriately archived and to get them distributed all over the place. Now, Roy Stryker began this project in 1935 with a mission to document the conditions of sharecroppers. But as the photographers were out and working, he realized that it had the potential to do much more than that. While the photographers were working for Roy Stryker, he managed them with detailed shooting scripts. So he had the sort of directorial eye for how this project could evolve, and he directed the photographers where they should go in a general sense of what they should get while they were out. He wanted more than documentation of farms themselves, because a picture of a landscape that's ravaged by drought, for example, is one thing, but a picture of the people who live in that place is something else entirely. And he realized the potential for connection with the real people. So he wanted the photographs to play up the human element. He wanted the photographs as a whole to document many aspects of American life, not just the work of farmers and not just hardship. He wanted the photographs to point towards both causes and effects, where these hardships had come from, how people were dealing with them, and other aspects of their life as well, both the hardships and the joyful aspects of life. So many dimensions of American life. And through Roy Stryker's leadership, the project rapidly grew in scale. So during the Great Depression, there was no such thing as a national media. There were newspapers all over the country, but those newspapers were separately managed and they didn't have photographic illustrations. So there was no such thing as images that brought the country together until the FSA Photographic Project. There were separate journalists working in different places. But in terms of media that brought people together, there were publicity campaigns, okay? And what you see in this billboard here was a national publicity campaign of an organization of American manufacturers that were trying to push back against government programs, saying what America really needed was more consumer confidence. So they were a lobbying organization. They were trying to push the government away from greater program spending, but they were also trying to generate a sense of optimism among the American people by showing these sort of like happy pictures of how well Americans are really doing out there. The FSA photographers, when they're out on assignment, they're capturing images of what it's really like out there, which is in stark contrast to these super optimistic images that the National Association of American Manufacturers is trying to promote to the American people. So the photographers are capturing these images of plowed out fields, these ravaged farmscapes, where through a combination of forces, people are being driven off of their land because they can't grow enough to make ends meet any longer. And the sharecroppers who are left to live on this land, they've got nobody to work for any longer, so they have to hit the road. There's a lot of desolation in these photographs. So where the photographers are most successful is when they're able to capture connections with these people. Many of the people in the photographs are people who've had to leave the land where they had been working for one reason or another. There are a lot of migrant workers like what you see here. One photograph can really do a lot. In a photograph like this, you can see the boys at the foreground of the picture, and it's it becomes a photograph that's about friendship, and it's about these two kids and how they live. But you look in the background, you can see the kinds of houses that they're living in, and then over on the left, you see this railroad that's going off into the distance, and the kind of blurry, hazy figures of two adults who are sort of walking off into the distance. So it sort of suggests and implies a lot more than it documents concretely, and that's really the wonder of the photographs. They show something of the lives that people are living. And Roy Stryker's objective with these photographs is to suggest both the causes and the effects. And as a whole, they really capture a sense of real American life at this time. And there are plenty of people who are just living their day-to-day lives in the small towns and in the cities of America. This photograph is by Ben Shahn, by the way, and it kind of captures a little bit of this sense of humor that some of these photographers brought to their work. Different photographers had different styles, and they brought their sort of original perspective on things to the way that they visually captured the world. So at any given time, there are several different photographers working for Roy Stryker, and he's sending them out on assignment to different parts of the country, to cities and rural areas and small towns, with general ideas of what they're supposed to focus on. But beyond those general assignments, the photographers are basically on their own, and their work, their tasks are made clear to them. They have to prioritize a human connection with the subject, and they're good at this. They make conversation with their subjects. They take notes. They capture documents of what people are going through, and they photograph with a sense of respect for their subjects. That's one of the things that Stryker really prioritized was treating people like people, so that when the consumers, when the regular folks would see these photographs, whether they were in exhibitions or books or the magazines, whatever media they were going to see them in, they were going to see people who were like themselves, rather than people that they should look on with pity, people that they should look on as people who are more or less like themselves. So Stryker wanted the photographers to choose situations where the subjects were working to better themselves, that they were doing their best with whatever resources were available to them, showing virtue and responsibility. Part of the objective with this was to undermine stereotype misconceptions, whether those misconceptions have to do with people's race, or whether they're prejudices that the wealthy, the remaining wealthy in the country had against the poor, and feeling like the poor people kind of deserved their lot because they were lazy, or because people in the East Coast might have prejudice against people in the farm regions or the West Coast or something like that. He's attempting to undermine stereotype misconceptions by wherever these photographers go. He wants them to capture people bringing their best selves to the situation that they find themselves in. And this influenced the public opinion on the WPA programs, because the FSA is a government program, and part of the job of the photographers is to show that the programs that are trying to lift people out of poverty are actually working and are giving them just enough of something that they can grasp onto, that they can use these tools to make their lives better. Pittsburgh was one of the many places that FSA photographers went to. Here's a wonderful slice of life from Pittsburgh in 1938, a swimming pool for mill workers' children. There's a high school marching band in Montana. Got a beautiful view of the landscape in the background, and just like the architecture and signage and cars, all the evidence of everyday American life. Not all of that may have been the intention of the photographers to capture. They may have been out to capture one thing, but then they capture all of these other aspects of American life going on at the same time, and it's good for us to have that. But yeah, it's not all marching bands and swimming pools. The evidence of the tremendous devastation wrought by the Dust Bowl are things like this are significant parts of the archive. And the FSA photographers were very much aware of the disproportionate suffering of African Americans during this time. This photograph is by Marion Post Wolcott, showing the evidence of segregated life in the South, a separate entrance for Black people at the movie theater. Some of the photography that the FSA conducted was actually in color. Color photography was possible at this time. It had been possible for decades. It was really expensive, though. There weren't very many places where color film could be processed. The processing was expensive, and the budget was always very limited. So there's not a ton of color photography, but it's out there. And when you see it, you get this. It seems so much closer to real life when you can see the color of the way that these people really lived. You get a clearer connection to these people. The adults look so young, and the reality of the hardscrabble life that they're really living. The little details of their homes, and the way that they papered their walls, and the handmade clothing that they're wearing. It's all just so much more real and vivid when you get the color images. So again, it was part of the objective of the FSA Photographic Project to create connections between the people who are looking at the photographs and the individuals in the photographs, to bring Americans to America, and to really ground it in a sense of dignity and a sense of national unity and purpose.